got about 15 minutes of me talking, just laying some foundations and establishing a baseline, terminologies, definitions, and just kind of giving a bigger picture. Then we have about half an hour where we have a guest speaker from GE that's going to be talking with us today. And then about 15 minutes after that for you folks to answer or ask questions and hopefully get some answers. And yeah. So without further ado, we'll dive in. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about communication. Like I said a moment ago, communication, since we're talking about it first, is really being presented on because it is something that's very important, very integral to project management. Being able to communicate effectively within your teams, especially cross-functionally, is something that's really important. And it's not necessarily something that you get taught a lot about how to do as engineers. It's like a notorious stereotype that engineers don't know how to talk to people. So if that's any of you guys out there or gals, this might be a good one to pay attention to. So let's dive in here. So communication in the engineering sense. So yeah, communication is a lot of things. Obviously, it's more than just even a conversation like this. It's asking questions, effectively sharing ideas, but most importantly, being precise and accurate in conversation. So we'll kind of get into more of what that means in the following slides here, but in its most axiom form, in its most core form, communication is essentially the encoding and decoding of ideas and thoughts. So what is meant by that, and if anyone in the call here has ever taken like AP psychology or interpersonal communications courses, I'm kind of drawing way back to courses in high school here. You may have seen this diagram before. So basically what you're looking at is the foundational view of what communication looks like. So you have on the left-hand side here your sender, and on the right-hand side your receiver. And this basically just breaks down the two fundamental forms of communication. So in type 1, which is the rectangle on top, you have someone who's encoding a thought or an idea with a bias kind of being drawn from their culture, which is made up by generational, national, professional discipline, and gender influences. So, that's basically just to say that everyone communicates differently based on their current emotional state. And so that message is then transmitted and noise is picked up as it's sent to the decoder, which is the person you're talking to. And the really critical element there is the noise. So that could be something that comes from you, just as you're thinking through what it is you want to say, and then maybe not exactly saying it precisely how you meant to say it. Or it could just be the way that the person on the far end is receiving it and picking up noise somewhere in that process, which in the current digital state of the world right now is something that I think we're all keenly aware of. And so kind of making the whole process full circle in type 1 communication, send receive, the decoder, the person who's actually receiving the information would there acknowledge the fact that they heard what you said, and then they would communicate back to you. But the really important takeaway from both of those is the noise that's gathered between both the encoding of information that's being sent out to be decoded, and then the acknowledged message being sent back. So we'll get to why that's important here in a moment on the next slides. And then essentially type 2 is more so really what this is, which is one person encoding and sending information, and everyone else just receiving that information, and there is not necessarily a lot of feedback. So again, both sides of those, whether you're the sender or the receiver, you're going to be essentially not always 100% efficient at accomplishing the communication of whatever you're trying to communicate effectively. So we're going to kind of go into how that really important constant, that constant loss is overcome in complex project environments, especially in the engineering sense, because you don't want to be communicating in a way that is allowing for any poor assumptions to be made that may impact especially project outcomes. So yeah, so that poses the question here: how do engineers make the most of communication in project management? So there's actually some kind of best practices and definitions. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I'll kind of point out the most important ones. So on the left-hand side with the definitions, the right-hand side with the best practices. So it's important to remember who your audience is, and this may all sound a little remedial, but to really kind of wrap your mind around it and to think about this as a foundational element to everything you do from the beginning of a project moving forward. It's going to be really helpful, especially if it's stuff that's in virtual environments like this, where you really have to think out how it is you want to be communicating with folks, because you're not going to be necessarily getting that constant exposure just by dropping into the EB for 6 hours each night to work in the computer labs. You have to be kind of precise and calculated in how you're communicating. So remembering your audience, whether it's internal or external, formal versus informal, which more has to deal with how it is you want to be preparing that information. And then obviously what the hierarchical focus is. So some terms there that are important to note: upwards. So if you're communicating upwards, you're basically speaking with senior management stakeholders. Downwards is the team and others who will be contributing to work on the project. And horizontal is amongst peers of the project manager or the team. So just using that terminology just to kind of familiarize yourself with the 3D space that is kind of the control of the communication charting. But so getting into more of the best practices, and I underline them just to make the points a little bit more concise. Essentially, you want to be correct with your grammar and spelling, and this is something where engineers are notorious, especially maybe some of the more senior management stakeholders, where poor grammar, because you're just whipping out that email, and sometimes you actually don't end up saving time because you get emails back and you have to answer more questions than maybe what you thought you were answering with the first email to start. So correct grammar and spelling is obviously really important. Concise expression and elimination of excess words. So just really thinking about what it is you want to say. Maybe if you're typing on email, it's putting down all your thoughts on the email and then going through and cutting out everything is not going to be contributing to the objective of the email. Just to save folks time is usually pretty helpful. So having a clear purpose, so just outlining your objective right from the start. This email is to accomplish this, or this meeting is to accomplish that, or I want to talk to you today because of this. It kind of helps establish the objective set that's going to help move things forward more quickly, because everyone's going to be on the same page and aligned from the start moving forward. Being coherent with your flow of ideas. So following, this is kind of digging into what I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with right now, the WHO method of writing a resume, or WHO method for interviews, or STAR method. So that kind of outlines that. And then controlling the flow of words and ideas. So that's kind of giving context depending on what the situation is, just to make sure that, if you're talking about something that's not necessarily rudimentary to the folks you're going to be talking to, that you're giving them maybe something that they can look at, or something that they can read to make it a little bit more obvious what it is you're actually referring to. So, what does this actually look like as you're kind of outlining a project? So, say for example, you've been tasked with spending a certain amount of money, and you have a team that is your team that you're working with to accomplish this, and you're going to be spending money on behalf of a company, right? And you don't want to be spending the money in a way that is either undercutting or sidestepping the folks that the money is going to be impacting. So say if you're working for Michigan State, you're paying to upgrade the sidewalks. I'm sure you're all familiar with these. You have to send out the email to the students and to the faculty, so they know, hey, you can't drive on this road starting on this day. Otherwise, folks might be trying to drive into work that morning and run over your construction crews. So that is kind of the tail end of the communication chain. It really starts far before that, but that's kind of the forward-facing example of communications management plan in action. So a lot of factors will impact that strategy, but the biggest point is to ensure that the information is received appropriately and on schedule. So if there's something that needs to be communicated by a certain time, it has to be communicated by that certain time. And, defining what that necessarily is, of course, is going to be subjective on the actual project itself. And so the way you define that is by starting with an effective project charter. So we'll have more on project charters and how to write those and what those look like in later presentations. But usually it becomes very obvious as you're going through the project charter with your stakeholders on your team as to when it is certain things are going to be certain things are going to have to be communicated because you're going to be outlining those objectives that are going to have to be accomplished on that project charter. So once you've had that project charter established, you would be setting up a project management plan and project documents. And then the delivery of this communication plan is obviously dictated by the enterprise factors. So if you're communicating at Michigan State to students, the easiest way is probably going to be email, because we all have phones, we all have computers, we all have an email, so we can all check that. But if you're going to be communicating to folks that obviously don't have email, then you wouldn't use email. And you have to kind of think through those things, even though it seems, again, kind of elementary. When you're actually out there in the field or in the office working on projects where this communication is really important, if half the office doesn't use email and the other half uses some other type of messaging service like Slack or whatever it is, you have to make sure that you're capturing everyone in your delivery strategy, so that way folks aren't missing the message, especially as the impact of these projects start to get bigger and bigger. So really, why is communications management our first meeting topic? And that is because of this, well, I say familiar, but maybe not for everyone. It's the story of the submarine and the dolphin. So just to kind of dive into, and we'll come back to the image here. Basically, there's two main types of projects or project communication management plans we're going to be talking about a little bit more in depth here as we kind of wrap up, and that is the communications management strategy for predictive projects, and then also the communication strategy for agile projects. So we've actually all probably worked on predictive and agile projects, just in the course of making our way to this point in university. But to just kind of go through some definitions. So predictive project is a structure that essentially is used to predict project constraints and execution strategies. So essentially the project is planned ahead with as many variables accounted for as possible. And so as you start to define those variables, that's when you outline what your communication management plan is going to be. You expect that the sidewalk's going to be missing on this day, so you can communicate the week prior to that with the people that are going to be impacted by it. Hey, the sidewalk's not going to be there, find another way around. So obviously it's really important that if you're planning ahead and not necessarily always stepping through each phase of the project or each phase of the execution of the project, that these milestones are outlined correctly, so that way they can be communicated effectively. So so with the communication management plan for this type of project, it's necessary because the project team is seeking to inform the project stakeholders of the status of the project, or to discuss matters internally amongst the group. So on the flip side of things, it's important to let your construction crews know, hey, that sidewalk's coming out, and you guys are gonna be good to go next week because I just talked with the foreman of that group and everything's on schedule. And you can check it off your list and say, okay, I communicated, coordinated between these two groups, and no one's gonna be standing around just waiting to make sure that things are okay for them to move forward. So that's something that's really important. And again, this example is just arbitrary. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be necessarily physical, meaning it doesn't have to be concrete coming out of the ground. It can be code going onto a screen or into a software project, which we'll kind of get into that with the next bit here. So agile projects are a little bit different. So with agile projects, the whole point is that there's this constant flow of information about what the current status of the project is. So kind of stepping back to this diagram here. So, if the sidewalk projects at the university were managed the same way as an agile project is, then we would all be getting essentially invitations to be on meeting calls like at the end of each week to be given an update as to what the current status of the sidewalk project is and how they've had to adapt to changes either because of weather or because maybe they had to take out more concrete than they expected to, or they couldn't get trucks in time. So we would all be kind of updated constantly all the time, but that's not the way it looks. So, you know, the metaphor here is that the dolphin is the agile project, and the visibility of the project goes up in small loops, and it keeps coming back to the same point, just constantly refreshing to the stakeholders, which in this case would be us. But the reality is that it's more like the submarine, right? So you maybe hear through some obscure media source that they're going to be taking the sidewalk out next year, right? And you don't hear anything about the project until it's right about to be executed, and hey, the sidewalk's going to be gone, so you can't walk there. So that's kind of the metaphor to the submarine. And again, you know, this graph is kind of dependent on what kind of part of the project you are. If you're a stakeholder of the project, someone who's going to be impacted by it, this is maybe what it looks like, but obviously if you're on the project team, it might look a little bit more differently. So anyways, kind of stepping back over to the agile outline here, basically, and this is just one foundation for it. You have information radiators. Basically, it's like well, it could be something physical. It could just be some sort of virtual board. But a lot of tech companies actually use like these big charts. They take sticky notes, slap it up there. They have different categories, issues that come up in the coding project. They'll throw up some information on there and say, hey, you know, these are the bugs we're trying to work through. There's, you know, open action items, right? Or they might use some sort of virtual software. I think Slack does this. With like the Kanban boards. It's something kind of similar to that. But the big point here is that every 24 hours, so every day, there's a daily stand-up meeting amongst the project team. Everyone's touching base as to where they are currently. And it's just a real short 15-minute, what they call them stand-ups, where they share their progress, plans, raising issues or impediments that they may have. And there may be every 1 to 2 weeks, maybe a larger get together where they have external stakeholders come in, like the folks that might be the recipients of the coding project, if this is kind of like a contract deal, to kind of check in and see where things are at so they can give feedback and make sure that things are being done to the specification that the company was being quoted for. So, and then, yeah, typically at the end of each iteration, so when those do occur, they call them retrospectives. And so this sort of style is maybe something that's more similar to what folks are going to be using as you're working through your capstone projects, where you're, having class 2 times a week, but probably meeting more than that, and you're just touching base, just constantly going over, where current issues stand, or if you have been involved in any of the other student groups on campus that did project work on like solar car or the autonomous vehicles club. It's the same sort of principle where you're constantly touching base on what the current issues are, and you're reallocating resources to meet the demands that are required to overcome those issues. So let's see here. Yeah, so really the best way to learn about stuff like this is to just dive into more examples, hear from the experts and the folks that have been out there in the field working through these kind of strategies and adapting them to fit the dynamic needs of industry. And so today we have a guest speaker from GE, and I'll probably pitch over to Christian to do an introduction here, so that way we can get started with the next half hour.
All right, yeah, so we have 2 guest speakers from GE. Make sure I pronounce you guys' name right. Navia? That's correct. Sweet. Navia is their diversity recruiter, correct? And part of their OMDP. So part of that program as well. And then Moses or Moises?
Moises.
Moises.
Don't worry about it. Moises.
Okay. Moises is from GE as well, and he has quite a bit of experience on the resume, which you guys will be able to see here shortly. And yeah, so give it up for our GE folk who are coming in to stop by.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having us. Just to clarify, would you like me to present, or will you guys be presenting the
You can go ahead and present. I gave you permission, so hopefully it'll work. If not, I can always pull it up as well.
Let me know when you guys can see my screen.
Sweet. You should be all good.
All right. Can you guys see this? Moises, are you able to see this? Just
You're
fine.
on, Nadia. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you guys. This is awesome. And I thought we were going to be imparting some wisdom, Moises, but honestly, I've learned so much in the first 20 minutes. But before we get started and dive in, we'd love for you guys to kind of sign in so that you're in our system, right? So in the future, if you're ever interested in General Electric, we'll have it so that you've attended. You can scan that QR code with your phone, or I'll make it a little bit easier for you guys as well. And how do I get back into the chat? There it is. Let me send that to you guys as well. So as you guys are navigating through getting yourselves in our system, I'll talk. So hopefully you guys are multitaskers. I know that's not the focus of today's conversation, but we'll get started. So my name is Navya Deversetti, and I, like you guys, actually went to Michigan State about 2 years ago. So I graduated in May of 2018. Although I wasn't an engineer, I like to think that working in this very technical company, I'm somewhat in that engineering mindset, right? My heart does lie on the business side of things, so that's why I graduated with a supply chain degree with our business college. I love to travel, and you guys will see that's evident with the career choice that I made after graduating. I love playing tennis, dancing, all sorts of fun stuff. So a little bit of background on me. While I was at Michigan State, I had the chance to do a couple of internships, 2 with GE, 1 with Boeing. Decided to come back to GE and join the Operations Management Leadership Program. It's a mouthful. GE actually loves to invest in their talent pipeline, and so they've created a facet of rotational programs, and operations management is just one of them. And so within that, I've traveled to Ohio, Indiana, Massachusetts. I'm currently in Delaware, and I've done everything from managing an application, so some project management there. I've worked in quality, which really required me to hone in on my communicational skills as well. And I'm currently a supervisor. So this is where my soft skills are tested heavily. And in the future, I'd love to go into consulting. We have a program at GE that I'm very interested in. I'd like to also develop my technical knowledge base, and so in the quality organization. And then it's not the end goal, but a goal I have 10 years down the line maybe is to be a plant leader one day. So I'll send it over to Moises.
Thank you, Nadia. Hey, first of all, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to share some time with you. As you can see, I'm not going to read the slide in every detail for you, but you can see my background. My training was in electrical and mechanical engineering. Spent the majority of my first few years with GE doing engineering. Growing up, started as an electrical engineer, doing different management roles in different GE businesses. Got to a point where I had the opportunity to lead a fairly large global engineering team for GE Automation. And after that, I realized that I didn't know anything about things like services and product management. So the last few years of my 21 years with GE have been around services and product management to learn something new. All of these are things where communication is vital. And that's why I was very excited to join you today and talk about this.
Yeah, I'd like to first start off saying, like, hats off to you guys, the Society of Engineering Management, to want to talk about communication. Because I don't think it's talked about enough, whether that's in the business college and the engineering college. And then kudos to the people who decided to, at 7 p.m., join this call and get lectured a little bit more. But we're going to try to minimize the lecturing a little bit. One thing I wanted to talk about, because when it came to communication, and I really kind of learned about this a little bit more 2 years down the line. So when I was in Massachusetts, we have some affinity groups here within the company, which we can get into if you guys have any questions about later. But they actually had a workshop on assertive communication. To be quite frank, I was kind of skeptical because I was like, assertive? That sounds really aggressive. I don't know if I want to assertively communicate to anybody. But it was interesting because the way they pitched it, right? So I just wanted to talk through the 4 pillars or the 4 categories of communication that they pitched. Some of the steps that you can take to become an assertive communicator. And then lastly, some tips and tricks that we have when you want to deal with conflict management, or like if there's a conflict with a person. So the 4 categories that they kind of talk through, which is really interesting to me, is passive submissive, right? You're avoiding conflict, and I apologize because it looks like the orientation is all messed up, but it's avoiding conflict, appearing indecisive, apologizing excessively, and putting other people's needs first. And quite frankly, when I graduated college and the first couple of months, and honestly a year into my experience at GE, I found myself in many situations communicating passively. I think it's because I was nervous. I didn't really think I had the experience. Maybe honestly, if I was to talk to Moises 2 years ago, I would have been very, very passive with him just because of his knowledge and how much wealth that he brings to the company, right? And so recognize yourself when you are being passive a little bit. The other opposite end of the spectrum is aggressive. You're an emotional bully. You're being loud and violent. But the big thing I want you guys to take away from being in this aggressive category is that you're trying to create a win situation for yourself and a lose situation for the other team, party, person, company, whatever it is, right? And then kind of in the middle of those two, you're teetering on both of the lines is passive aggressive, a term that we've probably heard a couple of times throughout our years now. It's kind of like saying yes when you actually want to say no. You're sulking about the topic, you're kind of being sarcastic, your heart's not in it, you're procrastinating until the last minute. This is when you kind of want to take a stop and self-evaluate. Honestly, at any point during this communication styles that you're evaluating yourself, you want to take a moment to see, hey, what category am I falling under right now? And then there's the assertive, which to me kind of makes me think of like the military, right? And that's why I immediately was like, I don't know if I want to be assertive. But when we talk about assertive, you're being fair and you're being empathetic. You're trying to get to a win-win situation. So you're creating a outcome that's not just favorable to you, but it's favorable to the other party as well. You talk from a perspective of facts. You're not being emotional, and it's hard. And I'll give a personal example of being a supervisor amidst the COVID pandemic, amidst the things that are happening at our company right now due to everything that's going on in the world. It's hard not to get emotional about some things when you're communicating. But if you're stating with facts, it grounds you. It grounds where you're talking from and the perspective you're coming at. You want to make sure you're listening to the other person's perspective or point of view. That helps you be more empowered when you're communicating because it really shows that you paid attention. And that goes along with active listening, which you guys have probably heard. Because if you're already formulating an answer in your head while someone else is talking, you're not really listening to them. So a couple of steps that you can take to kind of shift yourself into the assertive communication category, right? You can listen more. That's the first step, active listening. You want to demonstrate that you understand the other person's perspective. State what you think and feel with facts, right? State what you would like to happen at the end, or what is the outcome that you're trying to reach. And then make sure you're considering consequences for not yourself, but the other party too. And this made me think, and they talked about this in the workshop as well, like conflict management, right? What happens when you're, oh shoot, something happened between me and the other person. You want to remember a couple of key points. One, you want to attack the problem, not the person. You're not trying to get emotional. Another thing that I really learned, which I really loved, is you want to avoid phrases with but. And I'll give you a great example. It's like when you're talking to your mom, your dad, your significant other, your friend, you say the phrase, I love you, but you were late again. Come on, you're late. So when someone hears I love you, but, you kind of negated the first half of the statement, right? Because all people hear is the second half, but you're late. Instead, try and replace but with and. I love you, and I'd really appreciate it if you can come on time next time, right? So that changes the perspective of how people are hearing things. The other thing is you don't want to start statements with no or I disagree. It's kind of that whole piece of active listening. As soon as I'm done talking and the first thing that comes out of someone's mouth is no, I disagree with what you're saying. It kind of makes me feel like you weren't listening to begin with, right? So a big part of communication is actually listening and not a lot of talking. And the last thing I'll say is use open-ended questions. Try to help others think through the situation themselves so that they can come to a solution. And when you're in a leadership role, this becomes really important because you want to make sure you're growing your team, you're a leader, you're not managing people, you're leading people, right? And so I know Moises has great examples of some of the things that we talked about, and we just don't talk the talk, we walk the walk. So Moises, they're all yours.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Couple of examples to share with you. And the first one is frankly of an example where we messed up and lack of communication was very expensive for us. This was back in the GE automation business. We make industrial controllers, industrial automation. And we just started receiving customer calls a few years ago. Any piece of equipment they were running in their factory using our controllers, say conveyors, all types of machines, suddenly they would just stop. With no apparent reason, no justification, every machine would just stop. Long story short, I think we probably spent 7 months trying to figure out what's going on. And what we realized in the end was root cause. We were using this microprocessor from Intel, and you were supposed to use a 0-ohm resistor attached to it on the board, and that stabilizes electrical signals. Right? We won't get geeky here on the electrical engineering, but you need it for the microprocessor to work. So the first question was, how did we miss this? Why isn't it there? We went and we looked at all the records from all the design reviews, because we asked the engineers, hey, did you guys have design reviews? Weren't you supposed to talk to the chief engineer, the principal engineer, and have them look at your work? Absolutely, we did that. We went through the logs and actually found in the logs that the topic was discussed in a design review. It was right there in the meeting minutes, the 0-ohm resistor. So we spoke to the chief engineer and the principal engineer. Hey, did you know about this? Yes, we knew about it. Did you talk about it? Yes, we talked about it. Talk to the engineer. Did you know about this? Yes, they told me about it. So you talked about it? Yes. Okay, what did you tell the engineer? Well, we told him to make sure he was considering the 0-ohm resistor. Is that all you told him? Yes. Well, they knew that this was supposed to be an external resistor. They didn't say that, they just say, hey, make sure you pay attention to that resistor. The engineer assumed, like in many cases, that this resistor was part of the microcontroller. So all he did was, in the software, he enabled a resistor that didn't even exist. So they talked about it, but they didn't actually communicate about the real meaning. This cost us about $25 million because we had to retrieve every single one of these products from our customers. We had them shipped back to our facility. On top of that, by the way, for a customer, the impact of taking this out, it's not just you go and unplug it. They probably wasted about 4 or 5 hours for each of these just to take them out. Unplug their entire piece of machinery, send it back to us, we repair it, we send it back to them. So just think of the amount of very real money, $25 million down the drain, because 2 people or 3 people were talking to each other, not actually communicating. And that's the reason why I'm sharing this with you. That's one of the biggest mistakes. I've heard this so many times. The biggest misconception about communication is that it happened. We confuse talking with communicating, and it's incredibly different. So something that I leave with you, very important as individuals, always make sure, are you just talking at people or actually actively listening? Everything that you heard at the beginning of this call, are you practicing that active communication and not just talking at each other? Make sense?
Yeah.
So lesson learned, $25 million down the drain, bad. Communication, good. So let's jump to the next one. And I'll start with recommending. This is, I've heard so many recommendations about books and books in business. And frankly, I believe a lot of that is not horribly useful. I want to recommend, if you haven't read this, this is the single best book I've ever read about communication. It's called The Question Behind the Question. And it's about how most of us, when we ask a question, we tend to have other things in our mind. We have a million things going on, and that 10, 15 words we speak in our question don't really reflect everything that's going on in our mind. So you as a listener can make a big difference by asking a little bit more. Why are you asking me this? What's really on your mind? What's your concern? What do you want to accomplish? Now, so let me share a story that's, again, very real application of this. This was when I was in that same GE automation business, but this time in service. We had just won a service job, my team working with the oil company in Abu Dhabi. It was a huge opportunity for us because it was our first job with them. If you're familiar with the oil business, oil in Abu Dhabi is a major deal. So it was incredibly important for us. And frankly, it was a relatively small job, couple $100,000. So we were celebrating because we competed for the job. We got the call, you got it, G is going to do it for us. We were getting ready to start. And about 2 days later, I get a call from our salesperson in the Middle East. Hey, I just talked to the customer, incredibly important new condition. I know that we're planning to do all of this with our team in the Middle East. They want us to take the finished product, this big electronic box full of controllers, ship it to the US, to our factory in Virginia. They will visit the factory. They want to see the test again in Virginia at the factory, and then they want it shipped back to Abu Dhabi. And we gotta do this because it's the oil company in Abu Dhabi and the reputation, and for all the reasons in the world, we just gotta say yes. My initial reaction, frankly, was absolutely not, because we're not making that much money anyway. If I pay out of my pocket to do all that and test it, send it to the US, retest it, send it back to the Middle East, we're going to be losing money. So we started talking about it. Finally, the agreement was, wait, before we make any decisions or before we tell the customer anything, let's actually talk with them. So we went back to the customer and explained, look, here's where we're struggling. This was not part of our quote. You can see in our documents, everything we sent you. It's not part of what you asked from us originally. It's not part of what we considered in our quote. We're really struggling. We're not going to be able to do this for free. Help us understand, how can we solve this? The customer answer was, you know what? You are absolutely right. We apologize. This was our mistake. This is a requirement from our company. It's absolutely necessary to test it in the US, but we should have told you. So give us a quote. How much more money is this going to cost? It was something we had never done before, this kind of, after we're done, ship it back and forth all over. We went to DHL and said, DHL, give us your white glove service. We want to give you this box in Abu Dhabi. You deliver it in Virginia at our factory. My engineers in the US will test it. Then you come pick it up and deliver it white glove treatment again in Abu Dhabi. We went back to the customer about a week later. Well, it's going to cost your $200,000 job. If you want us to do this, we need another 100,000. It's going to cost 50% more, but we can do it. 2 hours later, we got the email from the oil company. Yes, that's amazing. Thank you. You're the best. Here's our acceptance of the $300,000 job. And we did the job. We did fine money-wise, and we got our first job with the Abu Dhabi Oil Company. But again, I thought this was a great example of how, again, what's the question behind the question? Before you say no or before you say yes, trying to understand what the other person really has in mind. And I can tell you it works because I sold an extra $100,000 by doing this. So I hope these are examples that are useful to you in real life. I don't know if there are any. Nadia, I believe you have another slide you want to share.
Yes. So I just bring it back to making sure if anyone joined us a little bit later for this conversation, please take a moment to sign in. But we wanted to make sure, yes, we had the examples. We had some material for you guys. You guys have probably been listening to lectures all day long, but we want to leave a lot of time for you guys to ask questions. What are you guys thinking through when we're talking about communication right now? You know, I'll try to open up the chat to see if there's anything there. I can stop sharing as well.
I have a question real quick.
Sure. Yes.
So I am currently working as a learning assistant for a physics class. And a big part of that job is trying to get my students to actively communicate and talk to each other, like whether that's writing things down or asking questions or, just, commenting on the project itself. So I was wondering, what's like a good way to, like if someone is in particular isn't, communicating a whole lot or isn't participating, what would be a good way to like encourage them to do that without like calling them out in front of everyone else? And yeah, like what would you suggest?
Great question.
I can
Mr.
I can
Bridget?
share a couple of ideas with you. First one, model the behaviors you want to see in them. Let them see you do those things. So if you want them to participate, walk around, talk. If you want them to ask questions, walk around, ask questions from the different teams, especially if you're in a lab environment. Walk around, make sure they see you asking questions from each team, or occasionally turn around and just look at the entire lab and, hey guys, how is everybody thinking about this topic? How are you running this experiment? How are you solving this? So show those behaviors. And then when they exhibit those behaviors, make sure you are rewarding them. Like you said, you don't want to put anybody in an uncomfortable position, right? If somebody isn't doing it, don't push them in public, but be very public about your recognition and how you reward them and recognize them.
All right, thank you.
Oh, I apologize. I'm going to add one quick thing as well. I've been learning a lot about like different personality types and how people want to be communicated to as well, right? It's almost like the concept of the 5 love languages, because it applies to relationships outside of just the romantic realm as well, right? So one thing I would suggest, if people aren't communicating, that might just be because they maybe have or are exhibiting more introverted type of communication style. So if it's hard to call people out in like the entire classroom sometimes, because that's maybe not the best way to approach that situation, but connecting with them, like send them a quick text or a chat. Hey, are you doing all right? Is everything going well? That kind of personal one-on-one touch can help them kind of open up from their shell as well.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course.
I have another quick question for you guys.
Sure.
As far as like leadership and management goes, how do you guys communicate with your team when it comes to something like objectives or milestones or go lives for a project? Like, do you guys use like certain project sites, or what type of skills do you guys use there?
Sure.
Navia, do you want to go first, or I can go first?
Yeah, so I'll speak kind of from like the production operations side, right? And it was great because it was kind of touched on by, I believe, Forrest. I'm sorry if I'm missing that name, but we talk a lot about, we have production meetings, and it was kind of when he was talking about the agile piece, those daily stand-up, right? And that's a more short-term type of approach to kind of talking through goals and objectives. We start the day in the morning with my team talking through what are our safety goals, our delivery goals, our quality goals for the day, right? So making sure you're aligned frequently is definitely one approach. And I'm speaking from like the product management type of situation.
And I would say definitely Navia was spot on. And I would just say in my experience that the tools are many and they vary from site to site, function to function. And they go from simple Excel to brand new data mining reports with the latest and greatest software tools. I think what really matters, and that will continue to change every day, I think what really matters is not so much the tool, but how you use it. Mm-hmm. And the teams that really succeed are the ones that, regardless of the tool, are very clear about what are the goals, what are we trying to accomplish, so it's clear to everybody. And then they're also very clear about where are we relative to those goals. And if you can do that with a piece of paper or with the most sophisticated artificial intelligence in the world, it's the fundamentals that will really make a difference.
I agree.
Cool. Thank you guys.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
My name is Michael Scruggs. I had a question on I know you guys talked about different types of communication categories. How does that intertwine with different leadership styles? Let's say like democratic or authoritative or stuff like that. How does that come together when it comes to leadership styles?
That's a great question. Moses, would you like to go?
Sure. This one is it's a very good question. It's brilliant, frankly, because you're touching on something that's just part of real life. And frankly, this is my personal opinion. Some leadership styles are excellent, and some leadership styles, I'm sorry, but they're terrible and they don't work, and they don't lead to good communication. So is there a relationship between communication and leadership style? Absolutely. Not all of them are necessarily good. Just as an example, the autocratic style I think you mentioned, those are people who tend to be very direct, very clear, very transparent. Those are good things, but it's a one-way street. They talk to you, they tell you what to go do. They're not going to do the other half of communication that we heard at the beginning, right? Of understand and then take back what you are going to say about it and understand about it. So half of communication is missing. That's where hopefully you guys can grow and find a style that is true to yourself. But there are a million ways that you can be a great leader while still being true to yourself and having a strong communication approach.
One thing I will say, I'm a huge fan of Simon Sinek. So if you guys ever get a chance to read any of his books or watch his TED Talks, he's just a fantastic person to listen to, and he speaks from a wealth of knowledge. And it's crazy you asked this question because I actually watched this video on LinkedIn today as I was scrolling. And he talked about, there's like a graph that he kind of presented. And he talks about performance kind of measured against trust. And he's talking about leadership. And sometimes what ends up happening is you have really high performing leaders that don't have a lot of trust. And an easy way that he talked about approaching this is if you go to any team and ask them, and excuse my French here, but who's the asshole? Like they are quick to point and be like, yep, it's him, that's the guy. And then you also ask like, who do you trust the most on the team? They also point to someone. So I think one thing that you want to make sure you're kind of thinking through when you take this whole leadership and communication into perspective, right? How are you kind of instilling that trust in your team member? And there's a lot that goes from like, you're trying to establish credibility. You're trying to keep those open lines of communication. You want to be honest. So kind of like Moises touched on, just staying true to yourself is honestly probably one of the best ways. There's a question in the chat. I just want to make sure we're touching that too. Teresa asked, how do you suggest to balance building a connection with your team members versus making sure they respect you as a team member, team leader, supervisor, and do their work? And no problem, I understand I have multiple technology issues as well sometimes. So thank you for asking the question in the chat. Moses, I can go for this one if you'd like.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so actually this kind of touches home in my heart a little bit because currently I'm in my supervisor role. And to kind of put it into perspective of when I walked into this team, right? I am a young engineer business graduate, 24, I'll be honest, and I'm walking in there and most of my team, their age ranges as much, probably double of what my age range is, right? So I walked in there very intimidated. It was really hard to get that buy-in from them to see me as a credible leader, right? And so I pondered this question, and the thing is when you're on this particular program, you know you're gonna do a supervisor or cell leader role, right? And so for a long time I was anticipating, what kind of leader am I gonna be? What kind of supervisor am I gonna be? Are they gonna like me? Am I gonna be good, right? And one thing I'll tell you guys, it's a lot of time, and it's kind of what I touched on earlier. It's building that credibility. I wanted to make sure my team knew under any circumstances that I was there for them. And I built that by learning the process, taking the first couple of months, like do a 30, 60 day, 90-day check-in with yourselves. Like, what do I want to learn within the first 30 days? And in 60 days, have I developed that learning? Am I doing anything to deliver on anything? And by 90 days, like, where am I now? So kind of self-reflection and understanding. You understand the process, right? And then there's the people side of things. You want to get to know your team as well. And that's going to take a lot of soft skill development. And it won't come immediately. And even if you're not in a supervisor or a cell leader role, one day if you're a manufacturing engineer on the floor and you have a process that you're trying to improve, but you need to go and get the technician approval or like the supervisor approval to change up the production line and say, hey, I want to kind of include this new process in there. Can we change everything up, right? You have to get a lot of buy-in from people to do the things that you want to do, right? So it's just developing those things, understanding credibility takes time. And once you develop that, it's that whole trust piece again, then people would be willing to follow you as a leader, regardless of your experience or your age. Moises, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure, Teresa, this is a great question. We could spend an entire week talking about your question because it's a very real challenge of leadership. So I'll just leave you with a couple of suggestions. One, people, if you're a leader, people want to believe that you care about them, that they're not means to an end. And you can care about people and be honest and be yourself while not necessarily lying about their performance or as pretending like everything is perfect. So I think most of us are smart enough to recognize that, hey, when I did something wrong, as long as you're telling me the truth, but you do it in a respectful way, and I truly feel that in the end you care about me, that's the kind of thing that drives respect and trust. And the other thing is, part of that authenticity is recognizing that as a leader, the best leader is not the person who knows the most about a single topic. The best leader is the one who can make the most out of the sum of everybody else. So back to your question about respecting you and the knowledge, etc. That's the key. And if you're open about it and you recognize it, and actually you recognize their expertise, that will build the credibility as a leader.
That was great. That's so true. It looks like we have 5 minutes. Does anyone else have a question?
I have one. So I know that in different fields, the size of teams that you work on vary from like a few people to 30 people. I was just wondering what you think would be the biggest challenge or difference in leading a bigger team versus a smaller team, and maybe what qualities differ.
Navia, do you want to go first and then I'll go?
Nope, that's all you.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the question. It is different. It's a very insightful question because you're right. Size does make a difference in how you need to communicate. For me personally, small teams have always been easier because it's easier to just sit one-to-one, talk to each individual, go have lunch with each person every now and then. And to me, at least with my style, it's very easy to make a connection. And I find that it's also easier to communicate because I can take the message, and if there are 5 people, I can sit one-on-one with each of the 5 and tailor the message to each individual, make sure it's clear, ask them a million questions till I make sure that I've done a good job of communicating. If you talk about a team of 30 people, no matter how good your intentions, you can't go sit one-on-one all the time with all 30 of them. You can't go have lunch with all of them every now and then or individually. So it does put a bigger burden on you on finding ways to mass communicate that are incredibly clear, because you won't have those opportunities at the back and forth, and many people won't have a chance or feel comfortable asking you questions. So that's where you as a leader need to think, understanding that there's not going to be a lot of opportunities for the back and forth, challenge yourself. How do I make my message clear for that mass communication approach? Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome.
Any other questions, guys?
I also have a question.
Yeah.
So so right now, like everything is going virtual, and like gonna talk about like communication. So how can you like communicate effectively, and what challenges might you face, like having partners like who are also not in person with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. Very, very relevant too. I think personally, I'll say just taking the time to connect with people. And we have, just so if you guys are interested, we have Skype. We are actually moving to Microsoft Teams now within our company. And usually a lot of communication styles, I know Forrest kind of talked about it earlier too, is, you're emailing and you might be like pinging someone on Skype or sending a quick message or a text, right? I think one thing that's important is to try and understand the best mode of communication with certain people. So I'll be honest, for me, I personally enjoy if we're talking and we're not getting to a solution, and I didn't really have a chance to get to know you well. I love a phone call. I'll like set up a meeting with someone, or with Teams now. I find it really fascinating with Zoom that some of you already turned on your webcams, right? So it's not the culture yet at the company, but like turning on like the video to kind of talk so you can see the other person's gesture, their facial expressions and everything too. So I think at the heart of it, you just want to understand how the other person wants to be communicated to, or try different methods, right? It's new, and it's a refreshing way that we have to learn to communicate virtually. And to be honest, like it's going to take some time because I'm no expert at it either. But I would just say try different methods if one isn't working out, right? Just don't get frustrated that I've been emailing this person, still don't understand, I still haven't connected with them. Try picking up the phone and giving them a phone call.
Yeah, those are great points, Navia. And I would add a couple of suggestions. You know how I said a few minutes ago that the biggest misunderstanding about communication is believing that it happened. It's 10 times harder when everything is remote, right? So two things. I suggest make sure you do a better job of preparing. At the beginning of this call, there were a lot of really good suggestions about how good communication should be: concise, clear, direct. So more so, if you're going to do it remotely, challenge yourself. What am I going to present? How can I be really clear, really concise, really direct? And then the other suggestion for you, when you're in person or face-to-face, you have the ability to look at people and read body language, get a lot of cues. You're talking and you see the person nodding their head and you feel like, okay, that person agrees or got it. Or you get the person looking like they're about to throw up and you get, okay, we have a disagreement. We need to talk about this. When you're remote, you don't have all of these cues. So you have to, number one, be hypersensitive to any clue you can get from people over the video screen, if you have it, if they're on video. Listen to the tone of voice when they say something. Try to really read between the lines, and ask twice as many questions as you would if you were in person, to give people that opportunity to give you cues. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Yes. Thanks.
It looks like Matthew in the group chat actually included the Simon Sinek video. So shout out to Matthew. Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, we're on time and I know it's a late night, so we don't want to go over, but if you guys have further questions or if you're interested in General Electric, feel free to add me or Moises on, and I don't want to put you out there, Moises.
Oh, yes, please.
Awesome. Add us both on LinkedIn, ask any questions. And thank you for the Society for Engineering Management for having us. This was an awesome topic. So kudos to you guys.
It's amazing that you guys are putting time together at night to pursue something like this. It's incredibly important. I think it's going to help you throughout your entire career. Just congratulations. My hats off to you. And if there's any way Navia or I can help you, please reach out.
Anytime.
Thank you so much for your guys' insight. It was very helpful. I think us engineers really like to get a real perspective from the industry. So again, thank you for your time.
Hey, Navia, before you go, can I get your last name real quick?
Sure, Dave Rossetti. D. You know what? I'll put it in the chat.
All right. So since we are wrapping up, I don't know how to virtually applaud, or I don't know how everybody wants to do that. If we can get thumbs up or the clapping emoji or whatever y'all want to do. So thank you both for coming and stopping by. We all really appreciate it. I think it was a phenomenal presentation and discussion as well. So, all right. Do we have anything else from you, Forrest?
No, I guess
Thank you for inviting us.
reiterate, thank you. It is a late Tuesday night, but you know, just fielding those questions, I think everybody's really excited to talk to you guys. So again, we just really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having us. Bye, guys.
Bye.
All right.
Thank
See
you.
y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.